Hello, good evening. Thank you all very much for joining us. This is the first in a series of webinars about the future of post-production. Tonight we have Nigel Honey. We're going to be talking about Avid remote workflow and all the things that entails with different aspects of post-production. Everything from mental health to a small kind of masterclass on how to do a remote setup. Big thanks to Screen Island and Screen Wexford for letting us have a kind of geeky chat this evening. It's what we kind of love to talk about. So huge thanks as well to Suzanne and Rebecca for doing everything behind the scenes and setting this up. Now there is a little Q&A button somewhere at the bottom of your screen. If you could use that to ask any questions as we go. And I believe you can also upvote questions in there as well. So at the end of our chat, we will, fire a few questions at Nigel, try and put him on the spot a little bit. So Nigel Honey is the founder of Ability Academy, which he established 5 years ago after a remarkable 27-year editing career. And he's motivated to overcome kind of industry biases, particularly from being told he would not succeed as an editor due to having bipolar disorder. Nigel's not only proven these doubts were wrong, but has gone on to edit feature films. And Nigel's mission really is to foster greater diversity and inclusion in post-production, something I think we can all get on board with. Nigel, it's great to see you again. I think we first crossed paths many, many years ago at Ravensbourne. We won't
Yeah.
go into how long ago that was. I'm
Oh,
sure
that was a long time ago.
it was. It was. And we're not going to try and work out who was in the year above or the. We'll forget. We'll move on from there. Move on. And we've been in touch more recently. I was working on a feature documentary, and we had an assistant editor who only knew Premiere. Our main editor was in Avid, and you very kindly trained him over a couple of days and swapped his knowledge over from Premiere to Avid, and
Yeah.
project went very well. So it's a pleasure to have you here this evening.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Shall we start with, I suppose, in terms of remote editing, I
Mm.
suppose the anchor point or what kicked it off was COVID, that really decentralized the industry. Maybe tell us, kind of what happened around that time. Because a lot of us, we were all in the center of cities and all of a sudden we were in our own homes.
Mm. So basically, a lot of companies, due to COVID, had to move a lot of their operations online. So what was happening is that they would send out either computers or Avids, or sometimes they would just send out the computers and people would actually dial into the post house. So interesting enough, that one of my jobs that I did, I was based in Scotland. The Avid that I was actually controlling was in a company in Brighton, and the producer and the director themselves were in London. So it was quite an interesting setup. And bizarrely enough, it all seemed to work. So I was using a, a, a device called Splash Top, and what that allowed me to do is to dial into a server and then dial into the Avid. The only fine thing I found difficult about it is I was actually controlling a PC and I was operating a Mac. So I was trying to use command keys, and I realized on a PC it's control. So once you get your head around there, it wasn't much of a difference. The Avid was pretty much the setup that I had set up so that all the keyboard shortcuts were the same. But the only difference was that I was controlling a PC and I was based on a Mac. And the latency, there wasn't any latency in terms of sync. It all played back correctly. And it just seemed to work. And it was amazing how many people and how many post houses suddenly moved over to this remote way of working. And I remember, like last Christmas, I was one of the only editors that was still in house, while all the other edit suites and all the other editors were dialing in remote. So there is now this kind of dual kind of way of working, where some people have gone back to post houses and a lot of people are still working remotely.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the keyboards. I remember that being frustration during that time of mapping keyboards to different machines and all that stuff. I think my memory of it is it didn't come together very quickly. We were kind of sending around hard drives. There were
Yeah.
currents flying around all over the place, and for places that were traditional post houses and that weren't working remotely, it was a real shock to the system.
Mm.
Uh, and yeah, things had to be figured out very quickly. You gave some good examples there. I suppose maybe moving on from COVID because we're probably all sick of that one. And I think it was a good thing though. But personally, I'm glad that it was decent. It gave us the option to work from home.
Mm.
It's I think it was very freeing in a lot of ways. And I think that kind of brings us into just what are the mental health challenges with
Well,
working remotely. Because there are benefits and there are challenges as
well,
well.
there is, and but the reason I used to struggle as a full-time editor is the amount of hours that I used to have to put on, because some days I was working 12, sometimes even up to 16-hour days. And obviously that's eventually going to have a toll on your mental health. And unfortunately, it did have a toll on my mental health. But working remotely, what I liked about it is as long as I got what I needed to get done, I could have my own break. So I wasn't determined, like if it was 1 o'clock, I had to then go and get my lunch break. And having a dog at home as well, it was great because I could just go out across the field, have a quite nice break into the fresh air, and then back into the edit suite. Whereas sometimes I felt when I was working a post house, I felt really guilty of actually leaving the edit suite. And there was often times when you would stay in for lunch and get a runner or someone to bring your lunch in, and you would continue to work. So technically, you wasn't really even having a break because you was working through lunch and still staring at the screen. So obviously that's going to have an effect as well, because you don't really want to be staring at the screen 24/7. You want to have them breaks away from the screen just to get a coffee or just to get a break or just to speak to someone. And that's the only maybe disadvantage is sometimes when you're working from home, you kind of get into a flow, and then you need to set yourself alarms to say, look, I need to take a break now, sort of thing, because otherwise you
Suddenly
could
it's
get
dark.
back to that same situation where working 15, 16-hour days again.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember those long hours, before everything was decentralized and everyone used to smoke as well. Um, I'm not saying that, that was just a good break creatively, like the
Mm,
number of things that were solved in it is by standing outside and getting a bit of fresh air.
mm,
Um, and that's not something, that now that we're all kind of healthier as well, that's something that doesn't happen as often. But I think you're right, putting those breaks in and kind of timing them.
mm.
Because I remember actually talking or going to a talk well, one of the editors who we have on tomorrow, Mick Madden, I remember him saying about this, and this is pre-COVID, talking about cutting a film in his living room and how he would never do it again because he didn't have that commute to work and that thinking time.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but I suppose like all things, it's about balance, isn't it? And it's certainly great for the dogs.
I,
And
it's trying to get that balance right, because editing is a career that I love, and I would actually, to tell you the truth, I would do it even if I wasn't get paid for it because I love it so much. But at the same time, you have to get that work balance right. But it doesn't matter if you're working in film and TV or if you're working in another career. If you're working more hours than God sent, then eventually you're going to have a breakdown, which unfortunately did happen to me. But luckily, I sorted myself out and got back into it. The other thing to be aware of is that it's not good at staring at a screen for too long because you need them breaks. And so when I was teaching, I would set my classes into like little chunks so that people did have them times to come away from the screen, because otherwise you need that kind of rest your eyes, and you need to just have a rest away from the screen, I think. So I think that's very important.
absolutely, I think I suppose maybe to take it back to kind of remote workflow. One of the things that I still, even to this day, is a struggle. I think for all people working remotely is feedback. Between creatives and
Mm,
technical and clients, it's always and directors. It's one of the trickiest things. I recently did a session on a platform called Looper with a colorist, and that was great because we could highlight things on the screen.
mm.
So there are solutions out there. Do you have
I
any? recommendations or?
I used when I was working remotely, I used a system called Frame.io, and what I loved about it is that the person or the director could actually be making changes, and how it works, it actually comes up as little markers. So it's very much like the markers that you have in Avid or Premiere, but what it will do, you can actually, like you say, you can either circle stuff or you can put notes in, and as you're going through the notes, you can just click to say that's been done. And that works really, really well. And also when you've finished a cut, you can actually upload it to Frame.io. And it's a way of letting the producer and director look at the cut and then do the changes. But the amazing thing is, with some of the systems, you can actually be live. So they can actually be making the changes as you're doing the changes themselves, sort of thing, which is amazing, because before you would literally have to export a cut, then let them watch it, then get the notes back, then make the changes. And it could take a long time. And the other problem is sometimes it was some of the notes were a bit like very vague. So then you can always write back and ask them, is this what you mean, sort of thing. Whereas sometimes I often would, especially with paper notes, is get them lost, or someone would spill water over them, and then you're back to square one kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even in person, sometimes it's hard to work out what the feedback is, you know. So, anything I suppose that helps with that is better. And I know with Framo, the notes can come into its Premiere timeline. Does it do that with Avid as well?
Avid at the moment, you have to bring it in as markers, but with Premiere, it actually you can have it actually as a panel now, the Frame.io. So you can actually dial into your account, and it actually becomes a panel within the Premiere itself, which is pretty amazing. I think Avid eventually are going to get that, but at the moment, what you have to do is you have to sort of bring it in as markers as a text file, and then start working on it. But I do see that working much better in the future. I think the reason that Premiere is so good with it is I think they actually bought out Frame.io, so they've got more investment in the software.
Yeah, cool. Maybe we could take it back a little bit here, because you're predominantly an Avid trainer, would you say? Because and I think a lot of people, especially starting out, you know, it used to be that the Avids were locked in a post-production house, you know, and you'd go and you'd learn them and you'd do tape library and you'd learn, you'd assist.
Mhm.
But now, you know, Final Cut's there, which I think is great. I think it's very fast. Um, we always use that in news. Obviously Premiere, Davinci as well with its kind of color capabilities. So maybe my question here is, to someone starting out, which platform would you choose, or do you think
Yeah.
it's depends on what you're
Well,
editing?
I think nowadays it definitely depends on what you're editing, because I cut a lot of sport for a company called IMG, and I actually train both their editors and producers in both Avid and Premiere, because a lot of the times that on some jobs they're working in Avid and some in Premiere. So having them transferable skills is very important. And I think when I started out like 20, 30 years ago, then it was very much you had to learn Avid, because all the post houses were Avid, nearly all the news companies, everyone was Avid. But what's changed now is a lot more companies are either using Premiere or Resolve. So I think if I was starting in the industry, I would, yeah, definitely learn Avid, because it's still a mainstay of a lot of broadcasters. But if you want to do maybe short form, I think Premiere and Resolve is a very good piece of software to use. And a lot of what you learn from Avid, you can then transfer into Premiere, into Resolve, because a lot of the shortcuts are the same. And a lot of the techniques like 3-point editing are exactly the same, no matter what piece of software you're using.
Yeah, I remember years ago bringing the my Final Cut 7 keyboard into Premiere. So they've always been very welcoming to people from other platforms. Um, and I think you're right there as well. You know, it's still in broadcast, in film, Avid is very much still dominant. Um, but with the people coming up and, particularly kind of advertising and agency jobs, there's a lot more Premiere because it's just, I
Mm.
think it's seen as a faster and kind of more nimble piece of software.
Well, the interesting thing is that a lot of people, it used to be the fact that Premiere wasn't very good at long form productions. But what's interesting is I've cut two feature films in Avid and two feature films in Premiere, and they just worked And it's because now you can work on things called productions, and you can actually work collaboratively on a show, whereas before it was very much standalone. It was the editor on their own, and you couldn't really work with anyone else. And this is why a lot of people preferred Avid, because with Avid you can share the bins and you can share music and graphics and that. But you now can do that in Premiere as well. So you can work collaboratively in Premiere, and you can do it now in Resolve, because Resolve has now got system now where you can work in the cloud itself. So you can actually set up a cloud um, account, and then you can work remotely across the world. So that's another interesting thing to be aware of now.
Yeah, I suppose Avid was always the was almost like the original remote setup. Although they're in the same building, but it was all about collaboration and sharing and working on a server. Um, do you think that, these remote workflows and hybrid? Do you think that's here to stay, or do you think we'll all end up back in post houses in the next 5, 10 years?
I think it depends in what part of post production you are, because I think in terms of offline and in terms of film editing, I think there's a lot more people going to stay working remotely. However, things like onlining and color grading, where you're using quite expensive equipment, I don't think people can afford to set up their own home studios like that anymore. So I think for them kind of things, you will still need post houses. But for the fact that a lot of editors now especially offline or film editors, like to work remotely, I think that could be a blended model. However, I know a lot of editors that have come to me, and as soon as they got back into the post houses, they wanted to do it because they missed that sort of connection, that kind of speaking to people, that kind of thing. Whereas when you're remotely, you are kind of a bit on your own, whereas they prefer to be in a post house where they've got people coming into the edit suite, where they're watching the cuts together next to each other rather than watching it remotely. So I guess they've both got advantages and disadvantages, but I do think that remote working is here to stay now. I don't think we're ever going to go back to everyone going back to just working in post houses anymore.
Yeah, I suppose that's what I was getting at before, really, with the feedback question. I suppose the stuff that's very nuanced, like the online and the grade, that is still quite difficult to communicate effectively
Mm.
uh, remotely. Um, would you mind kind of talking us through a kind of a technical setup of a remote Avid?
Yeah. So
Maybe, sorry, Nigel. Maybe start with what the technical requirements are, and
yeah.
then we'll see how deep down the rabbit hole we go
So
later.
the good thing is, as I say, a lot of people think that you have to actually have a license to run Avid remotely, and you don't, because what often people are doing, they're actually using the facility houses Avid licenses. So all you're really doing, you're just using your computer to dial it into a server, which then dials into the Avid, and then you can get access to the rushes and you can work remotely. So basically, what you're doing is you're not actually got the Avid on your actual device itself. It's the facility house you're dialing into is the computer you're controlling. So one thing that really got to me is sometimes with these computers, if you aren't using them for a while, they would go into standby mode. And the problem was I didn't have the password to unlock the screen. So there was times where I was trying to use the Avid and I couldn't because I didn't have the login for the standby mode. So that sometimes there is disadvantage of that. And the other thing is that a lot of the times you have to share rushes. So there's different ways you can do it. There's things like Avid on demand, but there's also a system that I use, which I use both for Premiere and for Avid, called Lucid Link. And basically what that is a big virtual hard drive in the cloud. And the way it works is you only pay, or the facility only pays for the amount of storage that you use. So obviously the more storage you have, the more expensive it is. But it's great for me for teaching as well, because I use it for teaching. And what you have is you have workspaces, and then you can give access to people to different workspaces. So if you're working on different projects, you can then give access to certain editors to certain workspaces, so that not all the editors have got access to the same workspaces. And for documentaries, that's great, because you might not want other editors looking at the rushes from a different production, or you might be the reason that you working on like part one of a show and someone else is working on part three, and you just want them to get access to certain amount of rushes, but not other rushes. So
Yeah.
these systems are great actually, and they work really well. And the only problem is, again, is if you haven't got a decent internet connection, they can be a bit sluggish. But if you've got decent internet connections, they work really, really well.
Yeah, I've used it. I'm familiar with Lucid Link, and it is great. It pops up as like a virtual hard drive, as you
Yeah,
say. And I've used it on features where we'll be shooting in a different location, outside of Ireland, and the drive populates as the DIT transfers footage. So you literally can see the files popping up,
yeah,
which is just great. We're not waiting for FedEx or
yeah,
shipping hard drives around the place,
yeah.
uh, which is great. Um, I suppose, do you want to go any further into that technical kind
Well,
of?
I can actually show you my setup if you want. So I can actually, if I
That'd be
can
great.
sh
I think a
share my
quick
screen. Yeah.
overview would be great.
So here I've got. Hopefully you can see it. Here we've got my Avid, and I don't know if you can see this, but I've got my device here. Can you see
Yeah, you
this?
can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And as you say, what it does down the side here, it becomes an actual device. So what I can do is if I close this and I've opened a bin here and I go into my file and input and source browser, down the side here, these are all different devices. So I've got not only my Lucid Link, but I sometimes use Google Drive to share media as well. So I've got my internal drive, and I've got my Lucid Link, and I've got this workspace where I've got all my different resources for different students. So I've got my Avid 101, 110, and I did some training at the BBC Bristol, so I've got access for them. And what they can do is they can literally dial into this, and they've got access to these folders. And when they go into it, they've got access to the MXF, all the media that they need for their actual projects. So there we go. And that's the way it works. And it's just amazing that you can do this, and you can work collaboratively with other people. So you can do it for editing, but you can also do it for training. So it's really, really good. And like you say, how it works is you can just keep uploading. So as more rushes come in, you can then get access to that. And you could be literally the other side of the world, because it's a virtual hard drive. I don't actually know exactly the location where it's stored, but you can just literally populate it as you go along.
it's good. So none of that footage is local to your machine, there, is it?
No,
No,
no.
it's all on the cloud. Did you say you take stuff from Google Drive as well?
Yeah, I used to use Google Drive to do it as well. It's not so good, but you can do it. So I've done stuff where I've got small amounts of media or music, and I just share it via Google Drive, that rather than sending them an actual hard drive. It used to be when I started, I would always have to get hard drives and send them to them, and then sometimes they would get lost or something would happen.
Yeah.
Whereas this, you're literally got access straight away, and you can start editing straight away. You can, if you want to, you could actually download that footage so that you've got a physical copy of the rushes as well, if you really wanted to. But I've never had a problem of stuff going missing or anything going corrupt. So I just use that virtual hard drive to work on, and it works. Well, I've worked on 2 or 3 documentaries now just using the Lucid Link, and it just works really, really well.
It's fantastic. So sorry, are you saying the media's on Google Drive and you're linking to it, or you're just using
Yeah,
Google Drive to try? Oh
I can
wow.
link to it, or I can download it if I want to. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. I suppose the next kind of, and we did cover a little bit of this earlier, was just kind of the evolving role of kind of edit assistants in the industry. Because I think it's a very
Mm,
interesting time. That kind of decentralization of the industry with remote working. The
mm.
fact that, I think the career path is more unclear than ever.
Yeah, I think
Um,
the
there
problem
was actually,
is,
sorry, Nigel. There was actually a question. Ashley asks, starting out, How do you suggest getting your first trainee editing job? What
Mm.
skills are most important starting out?
Well, for me, it's the same skills that I had to do when I started out. So for me, it all depends a lot of the times in terms of where you want to work in scripted or unscripted, because they are slightly different, but they still have the same skills. So things that I had to learn and things that you would need to learn now are things like how to transcode the rushes or use what is known as proxy files. So what often happens when we're editing, we're not working at the highest resolution because they would take forever to work with in terms of broadband. So what we do, we make copies of the rushes at a lower resolution, and then when we finish the edit, we then match back or relink back to the original files. Now, one of the roles of the assistant is to make copies of these rushes. So they would make either transcodes or proxies in Premiere so that the editor can then work on these smaller files so that they can edit. The other thing that I had to do was called syncing. So a lot of the times what would happen is people would go out, shoot the video and audio separate, but then either use time code or a clapperboard, or if they got not a clapperboard, it's just someone clapping to sync the picture and sound. And then my role would be to sync up the rushes. Now, what's happened now is you've got AI tools that can do some of this for you. However, and this is true, you still need a human being to check that the rushes are sunk correctly, because I've seen it where they're like 1 or 2 frames out of sync and people haven't even noticed it. And because I've been doing this for a long time, I can straight away know that their sound and their mouth movements aren't quite in time. So then you have to literally go into the clip and just nudge it so that you've got the sync reference back to how it should be. And unfortunately, it's a computer, so it doesn't know. But what one function it can do, which is great now, is it can look at the waveform of the, if you've got a video already recorded with the sound and the production sound, and you can literally just line up the waveforms together so you know that you're in sync. And I use little markers as a sync reference, and then all I have to do is match the marker points up. So that makes my life really easy. It's little techniques that you learn that you don't always get taught in college and uni, sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. Or you have to figure out yourself because your problem
Yeah,
solving is a huge
yeah,
part, I suppose. Like there was pluralize. Do you remember
yeah,
that? That was like the
yeah,
syncing tool. I mean, that was kind of almost a pre-AI, was AI as we know it now. That's an old tool, and that always used to kind of make slip-ups and not get everything quite right, and you have
yeah,
to go there and manually fix everything.
yeah.
Um, so I suppose, maybe leading on from Ashley's question, where would be best places to kind of learn those skills, and then maybe where would you go
Mm.
uh, in
Well,
terms of
there's several places like there's where I went, which is called Ravensbourne, which was great. There's also obviously the National Film School, and the other very good resource is Screen Skills. So I actually run courses myself through My Ability Academy, but I also run free courses via Screen Skills. So we've run courses for edit producers who want to learn Avid. We've run courses for edit assistants, for junior editors. So I would suggest you get a Screen Skills account, register. It's a free account, and look at the free resources. The other thing that's good is that with my courses, you can apply for bursaries. So rather than paying a lot of money for the course, you can get Screen Skills to pay for some, and obviously you need to pay a little bit, but it's not as expensive. And also look at Screen Ireland and Screen Scotland, because also they sometimes provide bursaries for courses as well. So there's a lot of resources out there. It's just knowing where they are, unfortunately. But the problem is that there's no guarantee. Some of these courses, like you can do a degree for 4 years, and there's no guarantee that you're going to get an editing job at the end of it. Sometimes the short courses are just as relevant as some of the longer courses, but it's a decision you have to make yourself. I actually didn't actually go to Ravensbourne straight away. I actually worked in the industry for a few years as an assistant, and then went back to college to learn editing, but bizarrely enough, I went to Ravensbourne and then ended up teaching editing because at the time they didn't have anyone to teach Avid. So that was an interesting one.
I remember at Ravensbourne actually their short courses were very popular.
Mm.
People coming in doing very sound. I think it's worth saying as well. And there's obviously lots of great Irish colleges
Yeah,
as
there
well.
is. Yeah.
But I suppose to echo your point there, yeah, it is. It's sometimes the long degree doesn't always suit and doesn't guarantee you a job.
Mm.
For me, it's just doing loads and loads of work experience every summer when I
Mm.
was at college, going onto different productions and just figuring out narrowing it down of which
Mm.
genre I wanted to do and what part of the industry, because then you can hone your focus and just bug those companies
And
and
and the
try and
other
get.
good thing is when I started out, the Avids and all the software were quite expensive, but now you can actually, if you're a student, you can actually get educational discounts. And I think if you're in an accredited course now, you actually get free licenses while you're part of that course. And the other thing, obviously, is if you use Resolve, the entry level version of Resolve is absolutely free. The studio one, I think you pay about £200 or £300 for, but the entry level one you can get free, and then you can learn some of the techniques that you can then apply to Premiere and Avid. So it's a win-win situation, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. Grania asks, could you talk us through your thoughts on using AI in editing in the future? Because obviously at the moment there are lots of powerful tools, transcoding, subtitles.
Mm.
They're improving all the time with accents. I remember trying to use that stuff 5 years ago and it was useless. So it's doubling in its capabilities kind of constantly. Every 4 months is what I heard. Um, so yeah, what are your opinions on AI in the industry? Do you think it's going to really disrupt it as much as
I,
because
I
everybody's kind of on tenterhooks at the moment a little bit, wondering what it's going to do to our
I
industry?
think it is going to disrupt it, and I'm just going to show you some of the things that are happening as we speak now, so you can actually see what Adobe and that are actually doing at the moment. So I'll just try and share this one because this is very, 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 very interesting. So what Adobe are actually trying to do is, I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah, okay.
Can you see this one? Sorry.
And indeed, yeah.
They're actually developing software where
Sorry, Nigel, we've
um,
lost what you were showing there. Apologies.
sorry, they're actually developing software where you can actually extend a clip where it wasn't actually shot that. So they actually add in frames to it. I don't know how they're doing it, but they're actually doing it. And there's also a function called Remix in Adobe now, where you can have a piece of music. I don't think it works very well with lyrics, but if it hasn't got lyrics in, what it can do, it can stretch the music to fit the actual music track, so it can actually fit the music to a cut, which is absolutely amazing, to tell you the truth. I looked at it and it was just like, wow, because a lot of the times I'm having to chop up music to fit the sequence, but whereas now it's got the ability to actually stretch or de-stretch the music so it actually fits the cut, and that's going to save a lot of time for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah. There's a DJ Studio as well that kind of automatically mixes music, and
Yeah,
you can play around with that. That's great, but it gets the timing for you perfect.
yeah.
Uh, so you do think it's kind of do you think it's a threat on the traditional
I
editing
think it.
stuff that we
I
have?
think it may be because there's even software now which actually creates the voiceover for you now. So you can actually type
Oh,
in the text and it will actually read out the voiceover. Now,
mm.
I can still tell it's a bit computer generated, but it's getting very, very good. And
Some of
and
them are
now,
really convincing, man. I don't know. Some of them are really convincing, and they even put the breaths in as well.
yeah. And
Um,
what's scary is there's this obviously this deep fake technology, and you can have like Morgan Freeman, and it actually sounds like him, and actually you can actually generate it so it looks like he's. You can still see it's computer generated, but it's getting a stage where you're thinking, if I was an actor, what's going to happen with my career? Because basically your voice and your image is your IP, and if you're losing that to a computer, that is very, very scary. And so that's why a lot of the strikes in America was happening, because people were worried about their careers and their future. I personally think, in terms of editing, I don't think you've got too much of a thing to worry about because you still need creative people to make the content. And what AI can't do, it can't actually create anything new. It can only work on stuff that's already been generated. It can't actually create anything new. And it can maybe do like a cuts only piece to music, but what it can't do is things like split edits and L and J cuts where you're actually separating the video and audio, and it just can't do that. And I've looked and it just can't do that. But who knows what might happen in the future, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there already is that AI ability to cut between two cameras,
Yeah,
from a two-camera interview. But at the moment, I agree with you. I think the creativity that we can bring um, to cut, give the same set of rushes to five different editors, you'll get five different films.
exactly. Yeah.
And there's a lot of kind of creative, artistic thought involved as well,
Mm.
uh, which is not easy to uh, create with AI just yet.
Mm.
That's the thing.
And
Should we?
it's a changes thing as well. Like, will AI, if you've got a load of changes, I don't think AI has got the capability yet
Oh, that
to
would be
make all
good
these
though.
changes, sort of thing. So I don't think that's going to happen yet.
That's an AI I would welcome. If I could just do an edit, then the AI does the changes and does the client feedback. That would be perfect.
Yeah.
Should we have a look at some Q&A questions to
Yeah,
see
sure.
what I have? This is like a dyslexic's worst nightmare here, trying to look at these. But let's see. There's one going back here. Can you allow download from Lucid Link with access?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, you can. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a little bit lost there. Do you want to expand on what that
So
means?
basically, what you can do is you can actually access the files from the cloud. But what you can also do is you can download them to an actual
Oh,
physical hard drive. So then what you've got, if say you come to a situation where you haven't got internet access, you've then still got a copy of the rushes on there. And I always say to people, whenever you're doing a film, always have 3 copies of the rushes because what happens if like the post house goes on fire and then all your rushes are in there? Always have either you, the director, and the post house have copies of your rushes. And the great thing is nowadays storage isn't as expensive as it used to be. Like I got a 6 terabyte drive the other day and it cost me £100, whereas 20 years ago that would have been 10 grand or more, sort of thing. So storage is definitely coming down in price. And for me, I like to have both a physical hard drive as a backup drive and obviously the Lucid Link as well.
yeah. And what about kind of deep storage at the end of projects? Because I think this is kind of there's almost an irony in the industry at the moment that we go back to LTO tape. We go back
Yeah, yeah,
to tape
yeah,
and then put them in fireproof
yeah,
safe. It's kind of
yeah.
everything's in the cloud until it's done, and then it's very precious. It's sort of tape. Do you think?
I think this is a problem. I don't think people are that confident of cloud-based for archiving at the moment. I do see that happening soon, but I just don't think that they're actually confident of archiving stuff to the cloud at the moment. Because like you say, a lot of people are still using LTOs and they're still using physical hard drives to back up because I just don't think they're confident backing up to the cloud is the right thing at the moment. But that could well change because it is becoming reliable, sort of thing. I think one of the major problems about that is security because people, if they're working on a project and it's quite a project about a certain topic, they don't want anyone accessing them rushes. I think the main thing here, even as we speak, is all about security, is making sure that only you, the editor, and the director have got access. They don't want some random dialing in and being able to take away them rushes if that. But I think a lot of the times there is protocols that you can set up. There is security that you can set up, so it is quite secure. But there is that kind of worry that some person may come in and nick all your rushes, basically.
Yeah, I think it comes down to cost as well.
Yeah.
We looked into it a few years ago. It was just prohibitive that you would archive your rushes to a cloud, and it's that's an ongoing cost as
Mm.
well. So
Yeah.
on Wednesday evening, I'm talking to Ben Folks of Base Media Cloud. So I think this will be, we'll get some kind of good up to date answers on that from him. Uh, then Fiona asks, is there a hub or group for, sorry, my That's my dog. Or training editors where they can discuss any issues they might be having and where they can get some assistance. Um, I know here in
Ye-
Ireland we have the Irish Screen Editors. It's a good
Yeah. Well,
guild.
I'm on the board of the British film editors in Scotland and the UK, and we have both assistant entry levels, and we've also got student levels. So it'd be worth looking at the BFE website, because they also do webinars and they talk to people who are currently editing features and films as we speak, and they're called Virtual Glasses of Wine, and they've been really, really, really good and informative. The other thing is there's a lot of Facebook groups to be aware of. There is an assistant editors Facebook group. There is all these different Facebook groups to be aware of. And when I went freelance, I signed up to a thing called the Talent Manager. And what that is like it puts up jobs all around the UK. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, but what it allows you to do is put a profile up so then you can add your credits. So as you get more experience, you can add more credits, and you can also add what training you've got. So if you've done an Avid course or Premiere course, you can put that on there. So employers then look at that and they can see what you've done, and then they can select the people that they want. And I found that was quite a good one. The problem is there's other ones, and I better not say all the names, which I find are a bit overpopulated now. So that you've got like 600-700 editors, so you're never really going to get a chance, sort of thing.
Yeah,
So it's all about connections. It's all about going to networking events if you can get them. And it's all about for me, it's getting in with new directors, because a lot of directors will use the same editor over and over again. So if you can get in with a new director in a film school, they more than likely are going to take you on in their career. And it's the same like with Scorsese and a lot of directors, they seem to use the same editors. So if you can get in with them, your career will be quite well done.
absolutely. I suppose here for our Irish audience, there is Crewless is a good resource for kind of jobs. Um, and there's also Dublin Editors. It's a Facebook group we
Yeah.
have here as well. Um, okay, there is another question here from Dara, which in my dyslexia, I'm trying to understand. I might just read it out verbatim and see if we can make sense of it. And this is on me, so apologies. He says he backs up to a NACE for some of his work. So it's located remotely at a private address as a form of redundancy. He's wondering, do editors appreciate that, or should they stick it on the cloud? I think that may be what we were saying about deep storage.
Um, it all depends if you've got to send that to someone else. That's what it depends, because if you've got to send it to someone else, then I probably would give them a actual physical hard drive. However, if I know that I'm one editor and someone else is editing, I would do it via the cloud because it's just so much easier, sort of thing. But if I know that I've got to archive, then I probably still would archive to a physical device rather than put it up to the cloud. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what I would do anyway.
Yeah, yeah, and I suppose yeah. Just to go back here, I suppose I would always, or we tend to through post houses go to LTO tape.
Mm.
But there we have it. I think that's good. Anything else you'd like to add, Nigel? We've covered a lot there.
No.
Um,
Well, I'm happy if anyone wants to connect with me. It's just Nigel at abilityacademy .co.uk. I think that's it. Well, just look at Ability Academy website and it's got all the details there. So, and I'm very passionate about training and getting a new generation into the industry, because I know how hard it is to get your foot in the door. But I think sometimes once you've got that foot in the door, then it leads on to other things, and it's just about getting your name out there. Unfortunately, I really struggled because I didn't used to like networking things. I used to just sit in the corner and hope someone would come over to me. But now I've become a bit more confident, so I start to talk to people, and it's just about getting to know people. And often what happens is people then make recommendations, and that's how the industry works, sort of thing. And a lot of people know each other, so it doesn't really matter where you are in UK, or in Ireland, a lot of people know other people. So then it's good to then find out what projects are coming up, sort of thing. Because the problem is, and I found this when I started out, especially facility houses, they don't always advertise the roles. So sometimes you have to approach them direct and find out if they've got anything coming up because they don't always advertise them. So sometimes you have to be proactive. So what I used to do is probably a bit old school now, but I used to have a thing called Kemp's and the Knowledge, and I would go through all the different post houses and send them CVs and a covering letter. But what you should also do is find out who the post manager is or the production manager is, because there's nothing worse in people sending CVs and not even putting a little bit of effort to find out who the post house manager is, because the trouble is they get hundreds and hundreds of these CVs. The first job I got, a company called the Moving Picture Company, there was 600 applicants. There was 5 jobs, and I got that job because I knew I wanted to be an editor, and a lot of them wanted to be directors, and it was a post house. And it's like, why are you coming to a post house to be a director? But that's just it, really.
Yeah, that's it. I think as well, people love to, once you get the confidence to go up to talk to people, people generally love to talk about themselves and their career and where they've come
Mm,
from, their experience
mm,
of it. Um,
mm,
and in general, people do really help each other,
mm.
and
I
it's
find that a lot. Yeah, I find in post production, people are a lot more willing to help you out than in some other parts of the industry. Um, there was when I started this kind of hierarchy thing is like I'm the editor, yeah, I don't talk to my assistant. But I think that's changing a lot now. So I think there's a more sort of two-way conversation, whereas before it was very much this is the editor, this is the assistant. The only disadvantage I find nowadays is that in some post houses, the assistant actually isn't in with the editor. They're not actually in the same room as the editor. And for me, I like the fact that when I started out, I was actually in the same room as the editor. So I learned a lot from that editor. Whereas sometimes if you're in a sort of machine room or MCR, I then found it really hard to learn sort of things. So sometimes what I used to do is stay on after the editor had gone and just get on the Avid sort of thing. And as long as you're okay with the editor, that they're usually quite good about you doing that. And that was, for me, was a good way of learning.
yeah, that and the Toucan on Soho Square, Distillers in Hammersmith, just going for a drink with them afterwards, and
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
always a good. Yeah, so I suppose again that's some of the benefits there of before it was decentralized and before it was went remote. So I think there's positivities there and differences as well. So I think we'll end on the positive though, Nigel. It's been great chatting
yeah,
to you.
yeah. You too. Thank you.